Good afternoon and welcome to the last workshop in Fianza's online conference week. My name is Ruth Owen and I'm the Deputy Director at Fianza. I'm very happy to chair this workshop. I'll just start, while we're waiting for people to join, I'll just start with some of the practicalities and housekeeping. So the three speakers, myself, Caterina Cortese and Domenica Spirato. You'll be able to see and hear us throughout the workshop, and you will be able to intervene either through the chat box, which you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen, or through the question and answer box, which allows you to type a question and direct it to a speaker. And we'll try and have a combination of if we're able, or if the speakers are able to, or others want to jump in on questions, they can type as we go. But I'll also try and keep an eye on all the questions and group them and be able to pass them back to our speakers at the end. We should have 15 or 20 minutes for discussion at the end. I'm just going to, my blind is open in my office and I see I have a lot of light on my face, so that seems better. Okay, so I just have a couple of slides to share with you in the introduction, so I'll just open those. Okay. So the topic of our workshop today is using European funds to combat homelessness. I think it's a really interesting time to be addressing this topic because we are just on the cusp of a new long-term budget of the European Union. So 2021 to 2027 will be a new budgetary period for the EU Union, also an unprecedented budgetary period because of the COVID-19 crisis and the fact that we have this huge recovery plan for the European Union. And as Fianza, we're convinced when we look at the regulations and we look at what's happened in the past period, that there are really very many opportunities to use the EU budget as a lever in the fight against homelessness, to invest in people, to invest in housing, also to cover material assistance. Clearly, the structural funds are not a magic bullet when it comes to funding policies and services to respond to homelessness, but they can act as a lever to really improve policies and services. And I think we're at a particularly exciting time from that point of view because the Commission is also taking on homelessness more and more as a social policy priority. We see that it's one of the priorities in the European Pillar of Social Rights, and we're expecting kind of ambitious action on this front from the Commission in the framework of its action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. So I think it's a really good time to be looking back on the previous period and looking forward to the next period and thinking how can we make the most of it for the fight against homelessness. I'm really pleased that we have two great expert speakers to talk to us about how we can do that and what we should be doing. So Caterina Cortese is from Fianza member in Italy, FIOPS. She's an absolute expert on all things homelessness and structural funds in Italy, and she's going to talk to us particularly about what they've learned with a dedicated operational program of the FEAD and the ESF called NOPS Inclusion, which was really targeted at improving policy and service responses to homelessness and moving towards a more evidence-based approach to tackling homelessness in Italy. And then our second speaker is Domenica Spirato, who is from the organisation Solidarity Now. She's going to talk to us about an advocacy
Rosie, you can continue.
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah, you're there.
let's
You're
see.
there. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was suddenly cut off. I'm
No,
not sure what
no,
happened
don't
there,
worry.
but,
Yes.
I'm back. Okay, so she's going to talk to us about an advocacy project that Solidarity Now ran in Greece, looking at how to make the most of the EU funds to address homelessness and housing exclusion amongst vulnerable migrants in the next programming period. And so just before I hand over to Katerina, I'd like to take the opportunity to make two shameless plugs for Fianza. The first one is to say that we have just launched our Fianza Ending Homelessness Awards, the third edition, and they're very much related to the topic we're discussing today. They're about recognizing and promoting good practice in the use of EU funds to tackle homelessness. So this edition will be looking across three funds: the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, and the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived. And we want to capture projects and programs that have really made a difference and that can provide a good example for the next funding period. And you can apply or nominate projects to apply until March next year. And we really count on all the actors on the ground to engage with this and help us identify really inspiring and useful projects. And also, I think that this online conference has been a really great way for us to connect with actors that Fianza doesn't usually meet at our physical conferences. And so I think it's a good time just to mention that Fianza's changed its membership structure, and we're now open to a broader range of actors. So as always, NGOs working with homeless people, but also now cities, other public authorities at national and regional level, foundations, think tanks, research institutions, and neighboring sectors like housing and public health. So if you're interested in Fianza's work and interested in connecting with counterparts across Europe to fight against homelessness, then know that Fianza is also open to you, and have a look at our website, get in touch if you're interested in perhaps joining Fianza. Okay, so shameless plugs out of the way. I'll now hand over to Katerina for our first presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. And it's a very pleasure to stay here at my home and speak with the people. Okay, share my screen. Okay. Can you see presentation? Okay. Okay, let me introduce myself and my organization. I am Caterina Cortese. I work in FIOPS. FIOPS is Italian Federation of Organization working with homeless people. We are a big federation in Italy, and we are a full member of Fianza. And this presentation is the result of exchange with our associated. And let me say a few words about the scenario, of course, about Italy and homelessness situation. The last data collection was referred to 2015, and we know that in Italy lives more or less 50,000 homeless people. We have a severe problem with the chronic homelessness, because 21% of people living on the street for 4 years and more. But we have emerging profiles, and women, young people, and migrants. And the last data is very interesting, because the third survey in the last year present more than 60,000 homeless people receiving material assistance in the last year. It is of course, a brief picture of homeless in Italy. And 5 years ago, more or less, we start with define the strategy to combat homelessness in Italy. And there were key steps. In 2015, homelessness became the priority for the ministry. And homelessness got in the national political agenda. And in the after years, the ministry, with together regional governments and the local authorities and FIOP's cooperation, write the guidelines. And the guidelines to tackling homelessness are a sort of toolkit where you can find the description of the services for homeless people, a sort of the wish list of the services, and you can find a recommendation about how is fruitful to realize the services for homeless people. It is a sort of the policy design for everybody, for every services in Italy. The guideline become the very faro for the homeless policies. And in particular, Housing First is quoted like the best way to solve homelessness. And the key elements of this strategy are the bottom-up approaches, okay, I said, because there were a really cooperation, because the ministry called in the round table a lot of stakeholders of homeless sector and invite them to define the guideline all together. And the goals, the objectives was overcoming emergency approach and promote a human rights-based approach. And the most important thing was that the guidelines are binding for service using EU budget. And I can demonstrate this one, because the guideline is a very important document for public services. And the public services become responsible for homeless sector. It is a key element of Italian homelessness strategy. Okay, in Italy, like other European countries, we have EU funds and different goals addressed to tackle homelessness. Okay, we have European Social Fund, you know. The goals are reinforcing homeless services, promote training for social workers, but also training and social inclusion activities for homeless people and most deprived people, and to promote the pilot projects. Okay, European Social Funds means social innovation, okay, means to catch the challenge for the homeless sector. And we have a European Fund for Regional Development, for example, and we have used the youth fund for reorganized shelters or renovating buildings and social infrastructures and housing side. Okay, and we have, of course, FEAD, a European fund for most of the private people, and the goal of FEAD in Italy was to promote material assistance, but not only, and to promote, yes, I wrote a starter kit for housing because it is a very jingle for us. And okay, we have, of course, specific tools for when I say we have, okay, public sector have specific tool to tackle homelessness in Italy. NAP, okay, National Operative Program, inclusion. NAP, I don't know what is the in English, but NAP is Città Metropolitane, is specifically dedicated to the largest city. Roma, Milano, Palermo, yes, the biggest cities receive specific fund for homelessness sector. And we have a poverty plan, OP1 FED, and different regional operative plans. Okay, these tools configure the homelessness strategy. Okay, what is the role of FIOPS? During this year, we work together, our associated organization providing services, okay, front office, outreach services, shelters, and so on. And we carried out advocacy action and sensibilization with the ministry, with the other regions that they have not services until, and we promote to reach the challenge of the ministry and to promote the new culture and the new services inspired to social innovation. And for us, homeless people can be as resources to invest, okay, in not only social problem. Okay, in this current period, the most important practical experience that we wanted to share with you, is the call for proposal launched by the ministry during the 2016, 4 years ago, because it is a very news in the scenario Italia framework, because for the first time, homelessness sector receive 50 million euros to combat homelessness in Italy. It is a good news. It is an opportunity because it is based on integrated strategy. It is a challenge for public sector because in Italy, like in Mediterranean welfare system, the homeless policies usually are delegated to charities and the third sector. With this call for proposal launched by ministry, the ministry called the regional governments and municipality to be responsible for the policies to tackle homelessness. For the first time again, the ministry called the local territories to define the new plan for homeless sector. And in this case, of course, we have EU funds, okay, 50 million from ESF, 50%, and 50% come from FED. The challenge is the vision of the ministry, because they promote to share funds, to apply integrated strategy, and to promote material assistance, okay, you know, but also to promote the pathway to social inclusion of the homeless people by housing, by work activity, by health services, and so on, to promote a new vision of the policies in Italy. This means. Okay. During the last year, FIOPS, with together University of Bologna, launched the monitoring of the calls, and we have observed that a lot of territories respond to the call of the ministry and submitted to the local projects and start finally to apply the services, to realize the new services in Italy. This is the distribution of local projects, and you can see more or less in the most part of the country, a lot of regions and the cities have produced the projects and start to the new services. What is the role of FIOPS again? Okay, we have decided to accompany the territories with the supervision for promoting the good use of these resources, because not all of local governments were ready to plan a system of intervention for homeless people. And the role of FIOPS was to accompany social workers, management of services, to apply the vision of the guidelines and to apply recommendation reported in the guidelines. And furthermore, we carried out analysis and research activities with University of Bologna and dissemination activities like that. Okay, this is a distribution of the main activities. Okay, macro action. Okay, what are the main action funded of the call for proposal launched by the ministry? A lot of territories, 22. I forgot to write the number of the absolute, is 22 local projects. It is a distribution per macro action. The most part of local projects are housing oriented. You can see 29% of the project introduce housing first services in the our yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, just to say about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I go fastly. Okay, this is a very colored pie to show that territories, yes, have used it for different action resources, and the most part are housing oriented. Okay, we have some example of local project, and for example, in the city of Turin, we have 2 big projects of housing first, and this project use integrated resources because they use EU funds by NOP and FEAD and municipality resources. This is all the data because we have now 50 apartments, not only 35, sorry. And this picture represents the people living in the housing first project. Not in Turin, of course, but in other projects, okay? And these women are true people living in the housing first project, housing. Okay, another interesting project and example is from Bologna, and they funded different kind of housing project, co-housing for people with the problem with the works, and a sort of the project Condominio Scalo, a sort of community housing for ex-prisoner, young and adult, and also this project, the very news is the integrated resources. They use European fund, local resources, and all together, yes, have carried out this project. And housing first for more than 60 people. Okay, we have lesson learned, and sure is the co-production, public and private partnership is the best way to promote, to provide homeless services in Italy, because we have a long history of cooperation between public and third sector in the charity services. Yes, we go over emergency approach. We are going over emergency approach because territory promote accommodation and light case management in the same place. And it is a very news. And housing is the answers. And yes, we have used the material distribution toward the housing project. And yes, of course, we have challenges and the gap between the timing of the planning and implementation of the policies. We have a long time of implementation because we have a lot of bureaucracy. And the challenge is the rules of the funds, EU funds, and we respect over the rule, of course, but it is, yes, we hope the challenge is flexible use of the funds, more flexible use of the fund. And okay, the last but not least news is the refinancing, the call for proposal. Yes, now the ministry launched the 50 million again until 2022 years. And yes, the territories are at work. Okay, I finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caterina. That was super interesting and also very condensed. So thank you very much. I think there are a number of elements that maybe are particularly interesting for other countries to learn from. One is the blending of different funds, the kind of holy grail of integrated approach, but often very difficult to do in practice. So it's always very encouraging to see examples. And also I think using the EU funds themselves as a kind of, if we can say, a carrot to incentivize moving in the direction of a more ending homelessness rather than reactively managing homelessness. So I think there's a lot in there that can teach us lessons for the next programming period, and also definitely some contenders for the Ending Homelessness Prize, I think, with the concrete projects that you shared. So I'll hand over now to Dominika. We haven't had many questions yet, so if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll come back to them after Dominika's presentation. Thanks.
I hope you can see the PowerPoint, right? Great. So thank you for the invitation and for giving me the chance to share our work on the topic. Of course, after hearing Katerina's presentation, I feel a bit disappointed about what we have been doing here in Greece in terms of policies, but also of trying to push for a better management of funds. We have a long way to go. Still today I will present aspects of our ongoing project on the use of EU funds to improve the housing conditions and the integration more broadly of asylum seekers, refugees and migrants in Greece. And I'll start by explaining why those two are connected in the context of Greece. So as I mentioned, public housing policies are underdeveloped here, therefore they cannot support the vast majority of people who need shelter. And while traditionally this role was undertaken informally by family members, this is the more migrants and people on the move arrive to the country that is becoming more and more difficult. Eventually, as a result, in 2015, when over 850,000 people arrived to Europe via Greece to seek protection and a better life, Greece had to immediately implement and develop housing programs. Since then, 5 years later, some measures have been taken. However, real progress has been achieved, as policies are not always the right ones. When asylum seekers come to Greece, they first stop at the reception and identification centers and the hotspots on the East Aegean Islands, where long food queues, poor hygiene conditions, lack of water, toilets, and so on, as well as overcrowding, lack of access to sufficient services, including healthcare, and tensions are some of the problems they face. And they actually may have to stay there for many months or even years. In this slide, I have attached the official number of the total capacity of all the hotspots in early September, which was 6,000 people, more or less, and their occupancy was 23,700. So one can see the contradiction. I have also included some pictures of the Moria camp before and during and when it burned down a few weeks later, something that you may have heard on in the news. From the hotspots, people are usually moved to the mainland, where they await for their asylum claims to be processed. And the types of accommodations that they are moved to are, the main types are the following. Temporary accommodation centers or camps in the mainland. We have 32 of these camps where the conditions are better than the hotspots, but still there are many problems. As you can see from the picture, people stay in containers or even small tents when there is when the camps operate at full capacity. And these camps are usually far away from main centers, so that people cannot access easily services, children cannot go very easily to school as there is no transportation, and so on and so forth. There is a program for to accommodate people, asylum seekers in urban settings, in apartments, and this is the best available program so far. And we also have temporary hotels, but people are hosted at the most vulnerable ones when there's no capacity in the other. But except for being very expensive, these shelters also have limitations, as they're also in isolated areas and they don't offer a proper housing solution. When it comes, just let me add that these facilities are usually overcrowded or operate at full capacity, partly because without no integration services offered to these people, they cannot become independent and move on. So when recognized refugees are asked and are required by law to leave their accommodation, the above accommodation premises within a month after they receive status, they have very few options to choose from. And actually they had no options to choose from until almost a year ago. Last July, an integration program for recognized refugees, ILIUS, started, which inter alia offers rental subsidies for recognized refugees as long as they find themselves a place to stay and provides relevant documentation. However, renting is extremely challenging for third country nationals, as racist prejudices among apartment owners exist, and also there are other factors that affect Greek society, such as short-term, the rise of short-term rental facilities and increase in rent prices. As a result, only 30% of the people currently enrolled in this program receive rental subsidies. And if one takes into account that not everybody makes it into the program, then these numbers even lower. As a result, some people had to leave their accommodation and end up in squares, and I have a picture from a square in central Athens from last summer. So when we saw that, that the government has not does not provide adequate material conditions for asylum seekers and refugees, and also the integration efforts here are limited and fragmented, we decided to look more into the issue of funding and see how we can influence policies to improve living conditions for these people. After a bit of research, we realized that our lack of in-depth knowledge of the EU system, how complex funding procedures and instruments hinders our ability to put pressure on the government and make recommendations. So we started a project together with other organizations based in Greece and in Brussels, which aim to positively influence funding for inclusion. We started having meetings with authorities, including the AMIF authority, which for those who are not familiar with migration is the Fund for Asylum, Migration and Integration, with ESF, to see their perspective on the management of funds and what is the planning for the next period. We also met with ministries and other relevant stakeholders. And after these meetings, we organized a workshop with civil society organizations, bringing those people that we met before to talk to them about the current situation, the funding challenges and gaps, with the aim of preparing for a bigger conference that was going to take place a few months later. In that conference that took place in February, we invited as many stakeholders as possible, including ministries, municipalities, the European Commission representative, managing authorities of funds, as well, of course, as civil society and communities of migrants and refugees themselves, to discuss ways of, to discuss our recommendations, set priorities and share best practices, but also find we'll work together, something that was missing. We didn't manage to involve all authorities and stakeholders, and that was a challenge, especially regions who get a big part of the funding. We couldn't get hold of them, so we need to work on that more. But what was very impressive and meaningful for us was that this was the first informal consultation we had with them. Since, as I mentioned, this is not happening, and it set the way for more collaboration. We are still in touch with authorities, and we're trying to monitor progress and influence policies. At the end, we issued a policy brief, which was shared with the outcomes of the conference and our recommendation, which was shared with policymakers in Greece, but also in Brussels with the Commission and members of the European Parliament. In the next slide, I will, this is, by the way, the title of the policy brief in case somebody is interested in reading more and finding out more about it. Sorry, and now I'll share some general recommendations about fund management that we all agreed unanimously on, and then some specific recommendations about how to improve housing for third country nationals. So in terms of fund management, we definitely need more clarity around the EU funding and the next multi-annual financial framework. We need more flexibility and more simple procedures, including about audits for funded entities. We need more coordination between programs and managing authorities. And this has been proved very difficult so far because there is a fragmentation of responsibilities across the Greek administration. And very importantly, we need meaningful participation of all stakeholders, but very importantly of civil society for the reasons I mentioned above in the planning, implementation, monitoring of programs. Regarding housing, which was one of the 3 aspects of integration that we discussed together with education and employability, our recommendations include, firstly, stop investing in temporary housing solutions such as camps, hotels and safe zones for children, and build long-term housing programs or maintain those ones that have been successful to ensure that people can have a proper integration services and proper integration. So more specifically for the STIA accommodation scheme, which I mentioned before, which is for asylum seekers, we believe that this program should continue. And it should be linked with integration services, which is not happening at the moment because they do not exist in a national scale level. The new program for recognized refugees should expand its eligibility criteria to include refugees that are not able to join it at the moment, but also offer more support for refugees who are looking for apartments, which is difficult, as I explained before. And there also needs to be a bridge between accommodation programs for asylum seekers and the program for recognized refugees, so a smooth transition between the 2 is ensured. Successful pilot integration programs, we have a couple, which have a housing component, need to continue and expand. And the same applies to alternative accommodation projects, such as PICPA, which I have included a picture here of, because this is a project that runs in Lesbos, and takes very, very vulnerable people from the hotspots. However, the government is trying to shut it down. So this is a campaign we're organizing, and we feel it's very important it stays open, it operates and helps people. Continuing on the list, we need more appropriate accommodation places for unaccompanied children, including supported independent living programs, also specialized accommodation for trafficking, sexual and gender-based violence survivors, as well as for other vulnerable groups. Very importantly, the government should invest in social housing and affordable housing for all. Sorry. I'm really sorry, this is the second presentation today, it's getting harder. And this has been missing from the country, and yeah, the government should invest on that. It should involve ministries, municipalities, and other stakeholders, and it should include mapping empty state-owned houses, as evaluating flexible schemes and innovative programs that can be adapted to the context in Greece. Social rental agencies could be an example, and actually NGOs and social enterprises could work as the mediators between private owners and people who need apartments. Last but not least, the government should put more focus on facilitating access to benefits, loans, and social services for third country nationals. People so far I'm really sorry, have been find it very hard to open bank accounts, access benefits, get a tax registration number or a national insurance number, without which they cannot rent an apartment, find a job, access healthcare. So all these barriers should be overcome. My last slide includes recommendations to the Commission about what they can do to support effective use of funding. So far, the current MFF has some structural weaknesses. It lacks flexibility in the preparation of budgets. It has complex funding regulations, and there are too many programs and instruments that makes it that create confusion. It makes it hard for people to understand procedures. Barriers and obstacles, and we hope so, because what is needed is simplification of procedures and less administrative burden. The next MFF also promises to enhance the partnership principle, which means the involvement of all stakeholders, including civil society actors, in the planning and implementation of programs. Of course, though, it's up to each member state to decide how strictly they're going to follow these instructions. So we need a bit more pressure there and more guarantees that the participation will be meaningful. Also, some countries do not allocate funding for civil society. We need a guarantee that some funding will go directly to civil society, and the barriers for them to access it should be reduced. We definitely need better monitoring and transparency. Every country should report on spending and on progress. And also, when countries violate the obligations when it comes to rights like housing, there should be some infringement procedures. I don't know if that's very strict, but or workable, but definitely there should be done something around that. Capacity building through trainings, workshops, and toolkits, maybe ways to facilitate sharing of best practices among governments, ministries, civil society organizations. That would be something that would help us. And last but not least, we need more investments. We need the Commission to push governments to invest in long-term policies. We need definitely more allocation of funding for integration, protection activities instead of returns. And more broadly, the Commission should stop granting incentives for countries to implement returns. Of course, all this is not very easy in the current context here in Greece, especially with a government that promotes a very anti-migration agenda, but we'll keep trying to push for these changes. And we hope to do a similar program on homelessness more broadly. That's it for now, and I can answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominika. Again, I think it was a very inspiring presentation, and it's a kind of example, I think, of the kind of work that needs to be done on the ground if we want to make the most of the next 7 years in terms of EU funding. So thank you very much for that. We now have a bit more than a quarter of an hour for questions and answers. So there are one or two that have come in through the Q&R and the chat. Perhaps I'll kick us off with them, and then please don't hesitate. You can either type in the chat or the Q&R, or you can raise your hand using the raise hand function on the participants list, and then I can give you the floor to ask a question. But there's a question in the Q&R at the moment from Stelios Kamporidis asking Katerina whether she could say a little bit more about the Housing First programme in Turin in the private rental sector, and how it actually works, what the basic provision for the beneficiaries and what the eligibility criteria are.
I can answer, okay. In the first question, Lazaros called me about the 50 million euros. Yes, they are just only for homelessness sector, and they funding different kind of services. The main thing is that this funding not funding, for example, new shelter, but reinforcing existent shelter with the case management activities or improvement of the shelter. and they funding Housing First project, of course. And the second question, for example, is the Housing First in Turin. Yes, I don't know exactly which fund is used for which scope. I know the European fund, they are not used for rent because it is not possible. But for example, for paying staff and new personnel dedicated to Housing First project. And probably housing is rent in the private market and they pay with other resources. Okay, it's a mixed method, and the mixed resources are used for the same project, for example.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just to pick up on the question of rent, I think it's an interesting example of why it's useful to kind of keep the exchange between countries going and to try and build the capacity and strengthen the knowledge base on using the EU funds, because it's something that you hear very, very often is that ESF can't be used to pay for rent, but actually there are some projects where ESF is used to pay for rent, and it depends on the specific circumstances. So I think that's just an interesting sort of technicality and an example of why it's useful to have this conversation and to look in the detail at how you can actually put the money to use to improve the situation of homeless people.
Yes, we need, in this case, we need of a ministry officer, because they know how to use the resource, and more important, they know what is the rules for use the resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Because yes, but I think in Italy in these years the very important process was to learn to use the mixed resources for different scope, for different action in the same project. For example, also for the center, a lot part of the fund of the call for proposal are used to invest in services during the day, with community activities and orientation for homeless people, front office, and so on. It's a sort of pilot and new projects.
Okay, thank you. There's another question in the Q&R, which is from Belgium, and which says that in Belgium there's a lot of discussion between homelessness and immigration, and how to allocate housing. And there's a question about how do the speakers see this? I guess what it's getting at is there a difference between homelessness and the situation of immigrants in different legal situations who find themselves without access to adequate housing? I don't know if either of you wants to answer that question.
Well, I can say that here sometimes we have such discussions as well, and you know, you address one ministry about homelessness and they say, oh, this is not our responsibility, this is the responsibility of the ministry that's responsible for refugees, and the other way around. And that's not only about homelessness but also about other issues. But that's why it's important to have a collaboration between authorities, and everybody should sit together and make sure that people are not excluded from, and also programs are linked with each other. So, you know, there is not a wall. We don't stop here, and we don't have only, you know, in Greece we have a program for asylum seekers who live in apartments, as I mentioned, but we should have similar programs for other people. Otherwise, this feeling is created, which is wrong. And yeah, so we should rethink of the way we do policies.
Thank you. Caterina, did you want to add?
Yes, it's the same answer, because also in Italy we have a specific project for asylum seekers and refugees people and family, for example, because we have the housing project for family homelessness. But recently we have a lot of migrants, irregular migrants, or migrants with, they wait for the documents, for example, and they live in the night services for homeless people. And it's not usually that they have the same rights to have services and answers, also housing. And in housing first, in some housing first projects, the housing means to have documents, because to have a residence, and we start to have rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely one area of intervention that could benefit a lot more from EU funding, and especially in the context of the big integration package that the European Commission is looking at launching, is this kind of the support to activate social rights, which are often a precondition to accessing the housing. And I think when it comes to improving homeless policies in general, there's a whole area of, I don't know, what we could call kind of housing related social work, which is all about preparing people and helping people to access housing, and also making sure that they don't lose their housing, and especially when it comes to third country nationals who, because of their status, can't access social rights, then there's a big funding need there, and I think it is one where the EU budget can add value. I had a question, if we don't have others, or just to give you maybe a couple of minutes as participants to think about your next question to Dominika, which was to ask like what kind of traction you feel your advocacy is getting vis-a-vis the new funding period, and what are the things that you feel hopeful about, and also maybe have you been able to, or would you be interested to connect more to the European level to support that advocacy, and maybe to be, you know, the programs are now negotiated bilaterally between the Commission and the Member States. What do you see as the role of the Commission in making sure this opportunity isn't missed?
Yeah, I'll start from the last question. Well, the reason why we partnered with organizations in Brussels, and one of them is ECRE, the European Council for Refugees and Exiles, is exactly for that reason, to help us promote the work and put pressure at this level. We continue to meet with them and other organizations that work throughout countries on this topic. We are having actually a meeting in early next week. So we share information, progress, recommendations, and ECRE helps us, and the PICUM, sorry, I forgot to mention that, very important. They help us promote these issues there. And I think it is very important to promote them, because unless there is pressure from the Commission to make sure that, you know, certain rights are guaranteed, then sometimes the Greek government, especially this one, you know, we may put pressure, but they, you know, our voices are not heard. I don't know exactly the opportunities. I was in touch with one of the authorities a week or so ago, and we're still in the very early stages of planning. We were supposed to have proposals ready, and this is not Greece's fault per se, in February or March, but due to COVID and other delays, we are not even there yet. We see disappointing developments like the STEA program that I mentioned. We thought that it's going to be expanded significantly. We hear that it won't. We're trying to figure out if this is because of programming problems and the government not being able to find partners, or whether they have something else in the agenda. But the ELIUS program, for example, we hear that it's going to be funded this year in the next framework, but by ESF funds instead of AMI funds. So it sounds like it's going to become more permanent. people will have access to it for longer. So these are the small things that we see and we're trying to push, both internally, because we are partners in Solidarity at least is partners of both programs, but also during our advocacy efforts. I don't think we'll see a huge change though, and especially I mentioned regions before, and the truth is that we didn't have much interaction with them. But we have access to municipalities, we have access to ministries, but we do need to have access to regions, because unless we bring them on board, we won't have any results. You know, like they keep a lot of the funds. So we still have a lot of work to do.
But still some time by the sound of things.
Yeah. And we can also influence things while, you know, after the proposals are submitted, there's always an opportunity to, you know, make little changes during the implementation period.
Absolutely, I think that's a very important point, and many of the priorities that are programmed leave a lot of space, like, you know, like social inclusion as such, for example. There's always space to come back to homelessness during the programming period, if that's there. So I don't know if anyone else has a question they'd like to put to either of our speakers or both of our speakers. Perhaps just to bounce back on one thing you said about the role of the Commission is that, I mean, as Fianza, we are very hopeful about the promise of Commissioner Schmidt, who's the Commissioner for Jobs and Employment, to launch a new ambitious policy initiative on homelessness in the framework of the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan. You may know that housing and homelessness is one of the priorities that's listed in the 20 priorities for social rights in the European Union, and he has publicly now said that he wants to launch a collaboration platform to help member states make better progress on homelessness during his mandate. And I think we see the funds as one really important pillar for action there. And if homelessness per se is a big social policy priority of the European Commission, I think that that should and must help to kind of, pressure is the wrong word because it's, you know, it's a shared management situation, but help to encourage sensible and strategic use of the EU budget to tackle homelessness. And I think the whole context of the recovery and the way homelessness has been on the agenda during the COVID-19 crisis can also be an opportunity from that point of view. So I think that we've done really brilliantly, particularly for this time on a Friday afternoon. I don't have the impression that there are many more questions. Speak now if you have something you'd like to say before we close the workshop. It doesn't seem like it, so I would just like to thank again both of our speakers, wish you all a lovely weekend, and I'm very much available at Fianza to exchange on use of structural funds and to support managing authorities or beneficiaries or would-be beneficiaries to try and promote the take-up of the funds to tackle homelessness. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Fianza.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.